Undoubtedly, one of the most pernicious and everlasting myths surrounding Hitler and the NSDAP is that he was allegedly a puppet of international finance, big business, and Jewish money. This accusation spans the realm of various independent media outlets from Alex Jones tier truthers to anti-Zionist activists such as Jim Condit as well. The roots of this myth can be traced back to the 1920s among the circles of Hitler's political rivals, namely the German Communist Party and the hard-left faction of the NSDAP itself, the Strasser brothers. Given that the Strassers vied for political power against Hitler and therefore had much to gain in smearing him in an attempt to separate him from his base, one can see the motive behind these accusations. Nonetheless, these myths persist even today. Without exception, the accusation of Hitler being funded by Jewish banks is the cornerstone of every Hitler researcher. The main basis for this modern reiteration of these slanders is Anthony Sutton's book, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler. Those who take joy in citing this book as proof of Hitler being funded by big banks have usually never even read the book themselves, or, for that matter, bothered to inspect Sutton's sources. The fundamental problem with Anthony Sutton's book is that it relies heavily on written memoirs instead of first-hand documentation. For example, Sutton relies on the anonymously authored Hitler's Secret Backers, allegedly written by a Sidney Warburg, which circulated in the cafes of Berlin during the 1920s. As it turns out, Sidney Warburg never existed, and was simply a pen name for an unknown author. Sutton also relies heavily on Fritz Thyssen's I Paid Hitler memoir, which was admittedly not even written by Thyssen himself, and in fact would later actually disavow the memoir. At many points in the book, Anthony Sutton has moments of candid honesty, admitting that neither the Bushes or Rockefeller Standard Oil ever funded Hitler. Yet again, more evidence that those who cite Sutton don't even read his book. Sutton's work, however, was refuted by another professor and historian by the name of Henry Ashby Turner in his 1985 landmark book titled German Big Business and the Rise of Hitler. Unlike Anthony Sutton, Dr. Turner sought primary first-hand sources. During the 1980s, Professor Turner spent several years traveling both East and West Germany, combing through the vaults of archival documentation in attempts to accurately trace who actually funded Hitler's ascension to power. Not surprisingly, Dr. Turner found zero evidence that big business and international banking firms had any hand in Hitler's political rise. It is important to note that Dr. Turner is actually anti-Hitler and has no biased agenda beyond being an honest scholar, whereas Sutton, a libertarian and classical liberal, wished to connect communism and National Socialism as both being fundamentally synonymous. Therefore, compare and contrast the veracity of Sutton and Turner's work. For all intents and purposes, Dr. Turner's book is of impeccable scholarly research in its reliance on first-hand sources, whereas Sutton's book amounts to unsubstantiated speculation. While it is true that American corporations had interest in Germany before Hitler's arrival into politics, and it is also true that multinational corporations donated money to the body politique in Germany post-World War I, the substantial sums of money went to Hitler's political rivals, such as the Social Democrats. This is accurately proven and put in context by Professor Henry Ashby Turner's book. The synopsis to the book reads as follows, quote, "Did big business play a crucial role in Adolf Hitler's rise to power? Did German capitalists undermine the Weimar Republic? Did they finance the Nazi Party? Did they use their influence on behalf of Hitler's appointment to the Chancellorship of Germany? For over half a century, such charges have been repeatedly made, and today one of the most widely held explanations of the Third Reich's origins places prime responsibility on Germany's leading corporations. Astonishingly, the subject has never been adequately explored, and up until now it has been commonly believed that the records which might throw light on this important connection have either been lost or destroyed. Yet as Henry Ashby Turner Jr. shows us in the pages of his groundbreaking book, these records do indeed exist, and the evidence that brings him to his startling conclusions that big business did not, on balance, support Hitler and his political program, will overthrow many of our conventional ideas about the rise of Hitler's regime. German Big Business and the Rise of Hitler takes us through the major corporate archives of Weimar and Nazi Germany. Turner brings us inside the executive offices of the giants of German industry, I.G. Farben, Flick, Krupp, Siemens, and many others, to show us the dynamics between corporations and political machines, businessmen and politicians, industrial associations, and political parties. The book begins by examining the heritage and outlook of German big business and the role it played in the politics of the Weimar Republic. After scrutinizing the attitudes of the Nazi Party's leadership, Hitler in particular, towards economic issues and big business, the author proceeds to trace the known contacts between the Nazis and the men of big business down to the triumph of Nazism in 1933. For the first time, the story is told from both sides, employing documentation from Nazis as well as business sources. In the course of assessing the significance of financial contributions to Hitler's party, the author provides the first systematic analysis of Nazism's sources of income. As much a book about business history as about the Nazi era, this volume gives us a new window not only on Germany in the 1920s and 1930s, but one through which we can view the behavior of 20th century private corporations, their executives, and their influences on our times." End quote. Professor Turner's book has been available for 35 years, and yet it is still widely unknown, whereas Sutton's book is a household name. This in itself speaks volumes to the overall agenda of those controlling the narrative of World War II. Beyond that, it is simply inconvenient and less exciting to admit that Hitler was in fact not a client of big business and high finance. Furthermore, during the Dawes and Young Plan era, which was presided over by the predatory banking houses Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, Germany was utterly beholden to the Wall Street internationalists. Hitler and the NSDAP were only able to sidestep their control by adopting unorthodox banking methods, such as the issuance of work treasury notes, which we will go into later. Why would international banks who had attained peak control support a political movement they knew would take away their control over Germany and even do away with their debt-based currency? This was no mystery to the financial elites. Hitler campaigned all through the 1920s, openly espousing Gottfried Feder's anti-free market and anti-interest slavery economic model. Likewise, Hitler's open agenda to remove Jews from positions of power saw elite bankers like Max Warburg removed from his Reichsbank position and ultimately expelled from Germany. Why would the Warburgs fund a party they knew would bring about this catastrophic end result upon themselves? These questions are neither asked nor addressed by those who say Hitler was financed.
We are resilient. When our society collapsed, we found ways to go on. And now, for the first time in centuries, what we want is also truly what we need. In the face of disaster, we helped each other.
We built new communities in the ruins of the old. We adapted. We survived. Established a new normal. But there are also those who build nothing. Create nothing.
Hyenas preying on the weak. They've made our world bleed. But we don't stand alone. A brave few have sworn to protect us and save what remains. They unite us.
Remind us that we are one people. They are our shield and our light. But if that light goes out,
who can save us then?
When Germany broke free from the bankers declared a world war against Germany. Even if it were true, when we look at all the facts, the charge that the Jews financed Hitler becomes irrelevant. Los Angeles attorney Ellen Brown discusses this in her book, Web of Debt. When Hitler came to power, Germany was hopelessly broke. The Treaty of Versailles had imposed crushing reparations on the German people, demanding that Germans repay every nation's cost of the war. These costs totaled 3 times the value of all the property in Germany. Private currency speculators caused the German mark to plummet, precipitating one of the worst runaway inflations in modern times. A wheelbarrow of 100 billion mark banknotes could not buy a loaf of bread. The national treasury was empty. Countless homes and farms were lost to speculators and to private, mostly Jewish-controlled banks. Germans lived in hovels. They were starving. Nothing like this had ever happened before. The total destruction of the national currency, plus the wiping of people's savings and businesses. On top of this came a worldwide depression. Germany had no choice but to succumb to debt slavery under international, mainly Jewish, bankers until 1933, when the National Socialists came to power. At that point, the German government thwarted international banking cartels by issuing its own money. World Jewry responded by declaring an international boycott against Germany. Hitler began a national credit program by devising a plan of public works that included flood control, repair of public buildings and private residencies, and construction of new roads, bridges, canals, and port facilities. All these were paid for with money that no longer came from the private international bankers. The projected cost of these various programs was fixed at about 1 billion units of the national currency. To pay for this, the German government, not the international bankers, issued bills of exchange called labor treasury certificates. In this way, the National Socialists put millions of people to work and paid them in treasury certificates. Under the National Socialists, Germany's money wasn't backed by gold, which was owned by the international bankers. It was essentially a receipt for labor and materials delivered to the government. Hitler said, quote, "For every mark issued, we required the equivalent of a mark's worth of work done or goods produced." End quote. The government paid workers in certificates. Workers spent those certificates on other goods and services, thus creating more jobs for more people. In this way, the German people climbed out of the crushing debt imposed on them by the international bankers. Within 2 years, the unemployment problem had been solved, and Germany was back on its feet. It had a solid, stable currency with no debt and no inflation at a time when millions of people in the United States and other Western countries, controlled by international bankers, were still out of work. Within 5 years, Germany went from the poorest nation in Europe to the richest. Germany even managed to restore foreign trade despite the international bankers' denial of foreign credit to Germany, and despite the global boycott by Jewish-owned industries. Germany succeeded in this by exchanging equipment and commodities directly with other countries, using a barter system that cut the bankers out of the picture. Germany flourished since barter eliminates national debt and trade deficits. It just so happens that Venezuela does the same thing today when it trades oil for commodities plus medical help and so on. Hence, the bankers are trying to squeeze Venezuela dry by utilizing the United States to issue sanctions against it. Germany's economic freedom was short-lived, but it left several monuments, including the famous Autobahn, the world's first extensive superhighway. Hjalmar Schacht, a Rothschild agent who was temporary head of the German Central Bank by inheriting the position from the previous government, due to how the Weimar Republic's coalition-building-based parliamentarian transfer of administration functioned, summed it up like this. An American banker had commented, "Dr. Schacht, you should come to America. We've got lots of money and that's real banking." But Schacht replied, "You should come to Berlin. We don't even have money. Now that's real banking." It should be noted that Schacht actually supported the private international bankers against Germany and was even involved in plots to assassinate Hitler, for which he was arrested and sent to a concentration camp later on. For his opposition to Hitler, he was rewarded by having all charges against him dropped at the Nuremberg trials. This economic system made Hitler extremely popular with the German people. Germany was rescued from English economic theory, which says that all currency must be borrowed against the gold owned by a private and secretive banking cartel, such as the Federal Reserve or the Central Bank of Europe, rather than issued by the government for the benefit of the people. Even disinformation agents like the Canadian researcher Dr. Henry Makow, who is Jewish himself, says that the main reason why the bankers arranged for a world war against Germany was that Hitler sidestepped the bankers by creating his own money, thereby freeing the German people. Worse, this freedom and prosperity threatened to spread to other nations. Hitler had to be stopped. Makow quotes from the 1938 interrogation of C.G. Rakowski, one of the founders of Soviet Bolshevism and a Trotsky intimate. Rakowski was tried in show trials in the USSR under Stalin. According to Rakowski, the Weimar Republic was funded by the international bankers through the bankers' agent Hjalmar Schacht. The bankers financed Germany in order to create a revolution like they had in Russia. It was not Stalin who was to take power, but their better agent Trotsky. It was Hitler, however, who became the biggest threat when he started printing his own money. Stalin came to power in 1922, which was 11 years before Hitler came to power. Rakowski said, quote, Hitler took over the privilege of manufacturing money, and not only physical money, but also financial ones. He took over the machinery of falsification and put it to work for the benefit of the people. Can you possibly imagine what would have come if this had infected a number of other states? End quote. Economist Henry C.K. Liu writes of Germany's remarkable transformation. Quote, the Nazis came to power in 1933 when the German economy was in total collapse, with ruinous war reparation obligations and zero prospects of foreign investment or credit. Through an independent monetary policy of sovereign credit and a full employment public works program, the Third Reich was able to turn a bankrupt Germany, stripped of overseas colonies, into the strongest economy in Europe within 4 years, even before armament spending began. End quote. In Billions for the Bankers, Debts for the People, Sheldon Emery commented, quote, Germany issued debt-free and interest-free money from 1935 on, which accounted for Germany's startling rise from the Depression to a world power in 5 years. The German government financed its entire operation from 1935 to 1945 without gold and without debt. It took the entire capitalist and communist world to destroy the German Revolution and bring Europe back under the heel of the bankers. End quote. These facts do not appear in any textbooks today since Jews own most of the publishing companies. What does appear, however, is the disastrous runaway inflation suffered in 1923 by the Weimar Republic, which governed Germany from 1919 to 1933. Today's textbooks use this inflation to twist truth into its opposite. They cite the radical devaluation of the German mark as an example of what goes wrong when governments print their own money, rather than borrow it from private cartels. In reality, the Weimar financial crisis began with impossible reparation payments imposed at the Treaty of Versailles. Hjalmar Schacht, the Rothschild agent who was the currency commissioner for the Republic, opposed letting the German government print its own money. He stated, quote, the Treaty of Versailles is a model of ingenious measures for the economic destruction of Germany. Germany could not find any way of holding its head above the water, other than by the inflationary expediency of printing banknotes. End quote. Schacht echoes the textbook lie that Weimar inflation was caused when the German government printed its own money. However, in his 1967 book, The Magic of Money, Schacht let the cat out of the bag by revealing that it was the privately owned Reichsbank and not the German government that was pumping new currency into the economy. Thus, it was the private bank that caused the Weimar hyperinflation. Like the United States Federal Reserve, the Reichsbank was overseen by appointed government officials but was operated for private gain. What drove the wartime inflation into hyperinflation was speculation by foreign investors, who sold the mark short, betting on its decreasing value in the manipulative device known as the short sale. Speculators borrow something they don't own, sell it, and then cover by buying it back at a lower price. Speculation in the German mark was made possible because the privately owned Reichsbank, not yet under National Socialist control, made massive amounts of currency available for borrowing. This currency, like US currency today, was created with accounting entries on the bank's books. Then the funny money was lent at compound interest. When the Reichsbank could not keep up with the voracious demand for marks, other private banks were allowed to create marks out of nothing and to lend them at interest. The result was runaway debt and inflation. Thus, according to Schacht himself, the German government did not create the Weimar hyperinflation. To the contrary, the government, under the National Socialists, got hyperinflation under control. The National Socialists put the Reichsbank under strict government regulation and took prompt corrective measures to eliminate foreign speculation. One of those measures was to eliminate easy access to funny money loans from private banks. It was after this that Hitler got Germany back on its feet by issuing treasury certificates. Schacht, the Rothschild agent, disapproved of this government fiat money and wound up getting fired as head of the Reichsbank when he refused to issue it. He was replaced by an actual National Socialist, Walter Funk. Schacht later acknowledged in his memoirs that allowing the government to issue the money it needed did not produce the price inflation predicted by classical economic theory, which says that currency must be borrowed from private cartels. What causes hyperinflation is uncontrolled speculation. When speculation is coupled with debt owed to private banking cartels, the result is disaster. On the other hand, when a government issues currency in carefully measured ways, it causes supply and demand to increase together, leaving prices unaffected. Hence there is no inflation, no debt, no unemployment, and no need for income taxes. Naturally, this terrifies the bankers, since it eliminates their power. It also terrifies the Jews, since their control of banking allows them to buy the media, the governments, and everything else. Therefore, to those who delight in saying Jews financed Hitler, I ask that you please look at the facts. The facts are that they didn't.
Der Bauer kann für seine Landprodukte nur das bekommen, was der Städter vorher erarbeitet hat. Der Städter kann nur erhalten, was der Bauer seinem Boden abrangt. Und all die untereinander können austauschen, was sie produzieren. Und das Geld kann dabei nur die Mittelrolle spielen. Es trägt keinen eigenen Gebrauchswert in sich. Jede Mark, die in Deutschland mehr bezahlt wird, setzt voraus, dass um eine Mark mehr gearbeitet wurde. Ansonsten ist diese Mark ein leeres Stück Papier, das keine Kaufkraft besitzt. Wir aber wollen, dass unsere deutsche Reichsmark ein ehrlicher Schein bleibt, eine ehrliche Anweisung für das Produkt einer von einem anderen ebenso ehrlich geleisteten Arbeit. Das ist die wahre, weil einzige und wirkliche Deckung einer Währung. Wenn also ein Volk, das 140 Menschen auf den Quadratkilometer zu ernähren hat und keinerlei Kolonialergänzung besitzt, wenn ein Volk, dem es an zahlreichen Rohstoffen fällt und das weder die Möglichkeit besitzt, noch willens ist, durch Kredite ein Schwindeldasein zu führen, wenn ein Volk, das über keinerlei Goldreserven und Devisen verfügt, und zwar nicht deshalb, weil hier der Nationalsozialismus regiert, sondern weil der nicht nationalsozialistische, demokratisch-parlamentarische Staat vorher 15 Jahre lang von einer beutegierigen Welt ausgeplündert wurde. Das deutsche Volk ist ein Volk mit einem hohen Lebensanspruch. Denn je größer die Lebens- und Kulturansprüche eines Volkes sind, desto größer wird seine Sehnsucht nach Frieden sein. Er allein gibt die Möglichkeit, jene Leistungen zu vollbringen, die den Anforderungen eines so hohen Lebensstandards zu genügen vermögen.
Glauben Sie mir, meine Abgeordneten, ich empfehle dir einen inneren Ecke vor dieser Sorte gewissenloser parlamentarischer Volks- und Staatenvernunft. Es tut mir fast weh, wenn mich das Schicksal dazu auserwählt hat, das zu stoßen, was durch diese Menschen zu Fallen gebracht wird. Und meine Absicht war es nicht, Kriege zu führen, sondern einen neuen Sozialstaat von höchster Kultur aufzubauen. Jedes Jahr dieses Krieges raubt mich diese Arbeit. Und die Ursachen dieses Raubes sind lächerliche Nullen, die man höchstens als politische Fabrikware der Natur bezeichnen kann, sofern er nicht ihre geistige Gerechtigkeit für etwas Besonderes stempelt.
Diese Verschwörung von Demokraten, Juden und Freimaurern hat es damals fertig gebracht, vor 2 Jahren, zunächst Europa in den Krieg zu stürzen. Es mussten also die Waffen entscheiden. Seitdem nun findet ein Kampf statt zwischen der Wahrheit und der Lüge. Und wie immer wird dieser Kampf für die Wahrheit am Ende siegreich ausgehen. Das heißt mit anderen Worten, was immer auch die britische Propaganda, was immer auch das internationale Weltjudentum und seine demokratischen Helfershelfer zusammen lügen mögen, an den historischen Tatsachen werden sie nichts ändern.